Well, good evening, everyone. This is going to be a little bit of a different video today. It's going to be a bit of a show and tell about what's in these boxes. But before we get into opening them up, let's go downstairs and I'll show you what they come from. So I thought it might be fun to do a video about something a little different. This is my turntable. Actually, it was my grandfather's turntable, and it's in a sort of washstand style case that he built. The turntable is a Thorns. As you can see, it's the model 101. This was sold essentially as a kit to people who wanted to build their own hi-fi cabinets, which he did. This works just fine. This is an idler-driven turntable, which I'll get to in just a second. Works fine. This has a modern cartridge on it, actually a very cheap artist. A very inexpensive one because I wanted a round stylus to recreate the original sound of this. I'm going to stand off a little bit to the side here because I'm standing in the light. There's a rubber mat on it. This is original, and the Thorns center, this is metal, has 60 cycles on this side and 50 cycles on that side. So if you put on a fluorescent light with a conventional ballast, you can use it to set the speed. I'm going to see if I can lift this up with one hand. Yes, I can. And so there you can see the mechanism. It's a pretty standard one. When the platter is on, this pushes against that, and you have a belt. And the only thing I had to replace on here was the belt, as well as lubricate these various points. The speed control, which is controlled by the center here. If you look over here, I don't know if you can see it, as I move it, it moves this idler up and down this conical part of this wheel. So the motor runs at a fixed speed. That's a synchromotor after all, and then you adjust the speed mechanically by moving that up and down. It unfortunately doesn't have enough. Well, it's quite obviously, you're still stuck to 33 1/3, but you can set it quite accurately. And you can use the phone in one of many applications to do that. As I said, there's the cartridge. The cartridge is under there. Here's the arm. Well, the arm is manufactured by Grado and is a cherry S-shaped arm. This was damaged when this was originally shipped to me, so I had to do some work, but fortunately the knife edge was in okay shape and I was able to get it to work. This whole thing originally rested on a foam rubber mat, like a typewriter mat, which he used to try to give it some isolation. That has turned into solid rubber in the bottom, and I have not made any attempt to try to fix that. It would be interesting to put it on modern isolation feet, but in this kind of development, this is a solid concrete floor that it's sitting on, and it doesn't actually pick up much vibration from anything, so it's been okay. Reach down and put the platter back in place. There we go. I'll put the mat on like that. I'll just turn it on. And there it starts. You can feel a fair amount of vibration here where the motor is mounted, but if you touch the turntable itself, the platter itself, you don't feel any of that vibration. So the belt does do its job. There are a few other things. This is a modern stylus gauge. This is a modern replacement stylus for what's in here. This we're going to take upstairs. These are cloths dating back, who knows. And stylus adjustment, protractor gizmo. This is a stylus pressure gauge from the 50s. As we'll see, I'm going to bring some of this stuff upstairs so we can have a look at it. This is my collection of Shure cartridges, including what's undoubtedly the original cartridge for this turntable, which places it at about 1958, which I think is correct. It might have been somewhere between 1958 and 1960 is when he built this. 1958 fits with my father's memory. So we'll take this stuff up. We'll take the Shure cartridges up. This is a modern replacement stylus for one of the Shure cartridges. I have a couple of those. And we'll come right back and have a look at this stuff in a few minutes. We're here at my desk and, well, let's have a look at some of this stuff. We'll leave these aside for a moment. This will start with the, I don't know, in some ways one of my favorite things, but this is a, as you can see on it, is a pressure gauge for styluses. It starts at 5 grams, and what it is it's essentially a spring scale. You put the stylus on here and then push this until this little metal piece is lined up in the window, and then you read the stylus weight off the scale on the side. I've tested this. As you can see, we've got, even though we're in Canada, we've got US pennies because they're convenient for weighing things. Right, so yeah, quite a useful thing. What is this under here? I've never noticed that. We have the instructions, and underneath here is a little clip of some sort. Might have been a packing thing for this. Well, I wonder if this was, well, I don't know. It doesn't obviously appear to work. But we have the original manual here. Gerard model SPG2 stylus pressure gauge, and you can see great 1950s style. Hopefully the shininess is not too bad on your end. Instructions on how to use it. Printed in England, presumably made in England, does it say? Yes, Gerard Engineering and Manufacturing Company Limited, Swindon, Wilts, England. Anyway, it's not a isn't very useful in the range you want. I will notice I've made a little mark there, which I think is 2 grams. But yeah, eventually I had to resort to a modern stylus gauge, much as I kind of love this. So let's have a look at some of the cartridges here. There was a Grado cartridge on it in its final iteration. I don't have that cartridge, but I do have the one before it, which is this. This is an Empire 888. How to enjoy the ultimate in listening pleasure with your new Empire 888 series cartridge. Patent numbers. Well, let's have a look. Oh, there's not too much left of this whole thing, but there's the cartridge. Oh, the cantilever's all bent over on that. Can't remember what that was for. This is probably used in balancing the tone arm. This is a very light cartridge compared to some of what was on there, and there's a brush, which those of us who remember the 70s will know were commonly used. And this is the end of a little bag that must have had the hardware in it at some point. Oh, interestingly, I forgot about these. These are extra gold-plated ends to put on the wires. That's good to know. Those might be necessary in the future. So that's the Empire. I don't remember the date for this. I think we're talking the late 60s or early 70s. Maybe. I'm not sure. But I remember this cartridge being on it, and I remember the Grado being a significant upgrade. Oops. Let's not lose the most important part of this. That was a little... That's this whole... there we go. This whole thing is kind of falling apart. All right, we'll put that back in there. We've got the instructions for the various models. We've got advertisements for speakers, Grenadier mid-frequency drivers, tone arms, and turntables. This is looking like 60s to me still. I wonder if there's a Empire Scientific Corporation, 845 Stewart Avenue, Garden City, New Jersey. Empire Grenadier series. Yeah, this is all looks very, very 60s. So yeah, I mean there might have been another cartridge on it between that period. I'm not sure, but I don't remember. But this Shure box is the really interesting part. So there's a collection of hardware, and then here are the gems of what he had, because we have the original cartridge and we have what's got to be the second one. This is the second one. This is the first, and this is a Shure M3D. This, I believe, is the original design and packaging of it, which puts it in 58 or 59. This has a modern stylus on it. You will see, let's see if I can hold that up. The stylus is like a giant nail through a giant cantilever. It's totally unlike anything that we would do now. The extra stylus I showed you before is a replacement for this one. This uses a spherical stylus, and in my mind it produces the sound of 1958. This is, I believe, Shure's first consumer stereo cartridge. I might be wrong about that. But this is the cartridge that it's got to have originally had on it. This works just fine. It's worth a little money apparently. Used in a lot of jukeboxes. They actually made this cartridge or versions of it for a very long time. As in into the 90s, right? Because there were just so many commercial applications where it was used. But yeah, it still works. It sounds, well, it's got a very distinctive sound. The distinctive sound is partly because of this gigantic nail of a stylus and very heavy cantilever. This tracks somewhere around 2 grams, I think. This actually tracks a little harder, but we'll look at that in a minute. This is great, but there's not much high end to it. I don't know what I do have somewhere the spec sheet for it. We have here, well, here we go. There's the original I didn't think I had that one. What do we have here too? Oh, so I did miss a cartridge. Here's a Pickering with his handwriting of the various. This might have been the cartridge before. That might have been after the Empire. Anyway, so here we have Shure, data sheet. It's pretty fragile. For the Shure M3D. And the M3D. And it says professional Dianetic cartridge. So frequency characteristics from 20 to 15,000 cycles per second in the language of the era. We have Shure's address, Everston, Illinois. Right, cable, Shure micro. That's very cool. And we've got Everston phone DA, I can't quite read that, Chicago phone SH31600. So that tells you just that we're definitely in the 50s, right, and with this. So its claimed frequency response is 20 to 15K. I think the 15K is generous. I think about 14K, given that I'm over 50. And probably I'm not hearing much above 15K. This is rolling off quite a bit earlier. We've got some recommended impedances. I've used this, and I've used these two cartridges, and the modern one that's on there. I've not tried to use the Empire because I don't have a stylus for it. That's any good. I've used these with an NAD preamp, as well as with my. Did I have that? Yeah, as well as with my old NAD receiver prior to using the NAD preamp with it. Let's see, tracking force, 3 to 6 grams. I misremembered. Maybe it's the later one that's 3 grams. Well, I'll tell you what the later one is. The later one is an M7D. I don't know if you can see that. The M7D is, I believe the magnets and the coils and whatnot in it are the same. This is Bakelite, I think. This one, I think, is plastic. But they changed it to an elliptical stylus and a more modern-looking cantilever. This is the original stylus on it, but I think it's been damaged, and this has much greater frequency response, much better extension. It sounds much more like a modern cartridge, but this one is very weak. I suspect a new stylus would improve it, but it hasn't been high on my list. This is not as desirable a cartridge, but that's still an interesting one. This, I think, tracks at 2-ish, 2.5 grams. This one really does like its 3 grams. Mounting, and anything else interesting here? I'd love to see a copyright date, but not commonly on this stuff. Stylus replacement. Anyone who's ever used an old Shure cartridge will recognize the pull it out with a nail file picture that seems to be used. And interestingly, of course, they talk about stereo preamps using 2 mono preamps, all discrete all the way through, and a variety of different kinds of equipment that would be used. In these early stereo days, there was a lot of mismatched equipment. My grandfather had 2 mismatched power amplifiers that my dad and my uncle built, one from Heathkit, one from a different kit manufacturer. With 2, one with octal tubes and one with something else, right? And so mismatched amplifiers, and had mismatched speakers too. Well, it wasn't very uncommon in the early stereo days. Those were eventually replaced with a pair of clips. I can't remember the model number off the top of my head, which my father still has. So yeah, We'll keep those in the family. We don't have any of the amplifiers or anything like that left. But the KLHs are still chucking along. Sound just fine. Again, not much high end, but there's some, lots of bass. So, yeah, so he obviously went from the original Shure to the updated Shure, which is maybe 2 or 3 years later, 61, 62 for this. I think it came out in 1960, but I would guess he waited a little while before he bought it. Which gives, again, goes to an elliptical stylus, goes to a lighter cantilever. Maybe the claimed frequency response of this goes to 16K. Remember, none of the speakers that he had would be providing any output above 15K anyway, but it does give it's smoother. This is very warm. I'll just say this sounds more like a modern cartridge. Then at some point there was this Empire, and it looks like there was a Pickering too. Actually, it looks like that dust brush might have come off the Pickering, and I do remember him having the dust brush on that at some point. So I thought you might enjoy this look into a couple of early stereo cartridges from Shure that I happen to have around and have used. I don't see much point in playing them unless I was to go direct into something. You wouldn't be able to hear the sound between them, and I'd run into copyright issues almost immediately. But maybe if I can think of a good way of doing it, I'll step away. But I do think a lot of the sound that we associate with jukeboxes and with 1950s and 60s sound is associated with the use of a round stylus as opposed to an elliptical stylus. So, as I said, I've opted for an inexpensive cartridge with a round stylus as a sort of everyday one. I might put the Shure back on. I do consider doing it every now and again, but the current setup seems to work pretty well. Well, thanks. Have a good evening.